Adventure Ho Illumineers, welcome back to another episode of DuckTale Dads. I'm one of your hosts, Nathaniel. I am joined by Mack and Ryan. How's it going today, guys? We could probably just jump right into what's new in our world. I know I'm just going right at it tonight, but I'd love to hear what's new in your guys' world.
I'll go first. So, new in my world, I have been starting to playtest a lot for Set 7 Champs. We're about, 2-3 weeks away from the first weekend of Set Champs for Set 7. So, I've been really starting to dive in and hone in on the type of decks I want to run. And then I think we'll get into more of the specifics throughout the duration of this specific episode. But yeah, I've been starting my Set Champ prep. Specifically, sticking to my original love in Ruby Sapphire, but I've been branching out in a couple other combinations. I got 3, maybe 4 ink combinations I could potentially try out this new Set Champ season. So we'll dive into that throughout the course of this episode. But that's my new what's in my world.
That sounds like you've been having an amazing time just playing totally new things and really loving the game in its entirety.
Yeah, I will admit, the first day or two getting used to new ink colors, because you guys know me, 95% of my play has been Ruby Sapphire. So it was definitely, even on ink table, it was a huge learning curve to just get used to not having as much ink at my disposal. Although one of my 4 is the Blurple, the Amethyst Sapphire, so there's still a little bit of ramp into there and having an abundance of ink as well. But the other combinations where it's literally just 1 ink per turn, no Sapphire, no ramp involvement, that's definitely taken a little bit of getting used to. But I've enjoyed it. It's allowed me to get used to other ink colors and ink combinations. I'm finding myself either leaning towards having one of my 2 favorite inks in Ruby or Sapphire with another combination, so at least it's not a complete 180. But overall, yeah, I've been getting used to it, and I feel like I'm getting the hang of it in preparation for Set Champ season.
Sounds like blast. Sounds like a blast. Well, new in my world, we recently welcomed home our second child, so that we are in the thick of the newborn phase, and it is a delight seeing everybody interact in our household together. Our older little one, our toddler, is adjusting well and adjusting as a toddler would, as you would expect it to happen. Some tantrums, a little bit of challenges in terms of both splitting parenting attentions and making sure that they're still feeling the attention and the love. But it's been a delight, and the newborn snuggles are unmatched in terms of oxytocin and feeling good after a long day of parenting. So yeah, we're in it. My wife is incredible, pretty already on top of everything and very stellar with just her recovery and getting the newborn adjusted to life. So we are in the thick of it, and we're still finding time and making time to hang out and just chat about Lorcana. Nathaniel, what's new in your world?
Yeah, some pretty awesome updates from both of y'all. I'll go a different direction for mine. I think all three of us say this, particularly for one of these, but it is currently playoff season for both the NBA and the NHL. So I'm a pretty big sports fan myself. I know Mack and Ryan are also. I know you guys are both for sure basketball fans. Ryan's a huge Duke guy, so I know he loves them.
Oh my gosh, I do appreciate they play very good basketball. I will say that, though I could never officially root for them. UNC, go Heels. Through and through.
Yeah. I had to make sure I included that one. But it is currently playoff season for both the National Hockey League and the National Basketball Association. And as we are in Minnesota, both of our teams are in the playoffs. So it's kind of fun to follow along with the local sports scene and hopefully cheer on some playoff success. I have never actually seen a men's professional team win a playoff championship in my lifetime. And that goes for all 3 of us. Maybe one day soon we will see one of the major 4 sports teams in our state take home a title. But we'll see. That's been kind of the big thing that's, I think, exciting for me, kind of following along more recently. But with that, I think let's go ahead and jump into it, guys. Meta roundup. I know we've been mentioning some playtesting has been happening. A lot of change, a lot of really positive change, I think, in this post Hiram, and to a lesser extent Fortisphere ban world. We're seeing some varied deck lists, winning tournaments. Mack, I think you should probably start us because you are our our favorite Ruby Sapphire player. How has this shifted what you've been doing more recently?
I'm your only Ruby Sapphire player. Let's clarify that before we dive into it. Ruby Sapphire. So in the busyness of dad life, right? It's really hard, at least for me. I just find myself stuck on deck building. Usually, if I find that one core deck of the same 50-55 cards, it's pretty easy for me to shift around the last couple tech cards. But after the ban, it was really hard for me for the first couple days to really think about, where do I go from here? I think I expressed that in one of the previous podcasts.
You were going through it.
I know. It was, like I said in one of the other episodes, it was definitely the stages of grief, right? But thankfully, over the course of the last couple weekends since the ban, I've been able to follow a lot of the more recent tournaments, both in Europe and in the States. And it's been nice to see that at least from the Ruby Sapphire end, Ruby Sapphire isn't dead. So I've been able to adjust in that aspect. The DKP list has been really helpful and for me to get used to the new trend towards Ruby Sapphire. Also with that, it's helped me branch out into what I expressed earlier, different combinations. Primarily, a Ruby Amethyst is one that I've kind of taken a dive into, and then I've tried the one without any of the current inks that I use. I've tried the Jafar wheel, although I don't think it's really top tier. It's really fun with the Amethyst Steel combination, but yeah, I've been enjoying those. I've also taken a little bit of the Sapphire Steel route. I'm really not that good with that deck, so I think that one's out, but for the most part. And then the last one that I mentioned earlier was Blurple, the Amethyst Sapphire. So trying to branch out a little bit. In my play testing, I've been finding that Amethyst, right? We're back to the set 6 Amethyst meta for sure. Almost every Amethyst deck seems to be viable. So that's another big reason, another thing I've started to dive into is getting used to the Amethyst build, not only how for my own interest, but getting used to what my opponents would be playing in preparation for set champ. So I think that's kind of the high level of what I've experienced thus far, is getting used to the Amethyst meta and then trying to transition to that DKP Ruby Sapphire list.
I think you made an interesting point there that we're back to the Amethyst meta, right? We mentioned it in our In Color series that Amethyst is kind of the best support color, the most consistent color it seems to be out there in terms of just continual output, constant pressure, that very reliable and dependable draw engine option out that you can also include in those type of Amethyst groupings. So it really just complements a lot of things. And I think that what we're currently seeing in the post Hiram, post Fortisphere, post ban meta is just that shift back to, okay, if we can't depend on Hiram to break the game open for us, how can we do that? And I think Amethyst kind of fills that void when everyone's looking for what can I do for card draw. It's pretty much looking at, okay, is it Rapunzel? And if it's not Rapunzel, then I'm going to play purple. And if it's not either of those, then I'm just going to top deck after turn 5, and we're just going to see how it goes from there. I'm interested when I listen to a handful of other YouTube videos or podcasts throughout the week, and just the meta reports that they are putting out there of just these are the decks that are topping or winning, and it is a very, very wide spread of possible deck lists. And it seems like if you're on a color combination that you're comfortable with, then that's going to be the greatest determining factor, not whether or not you get Hiram down first or Hiram down longer. It's not so much stuck in that phase of play, which I think is healthy for the game, right? I think it is. I am a little sad. You mentioned Sapphire Steel. You were looking into Sapphire Steel. I was really excited about the aggro list with the new bell and then the consistency that the popsicles and Fortispheres provided. So obviously the Fortisphere ban really cuts into that. And I tried to stick with it for a couple of weeks, and I just feel like I just not there for it anymore. So I am also switching color combinations to my focus for a little bit. I'm seeing if I can kind of tweak and pay attention to more of the Amethyst Sapphire deck lists and see what people are putting together and cooking up in their own labs while they take them to these bigger tournaments, so I can take some of their knowledge and maybe just put in some other things that I want to play and I like to play. Maybe I'm forcing set 7 cards, maybe I'm forcing new cards, and it's not actually better, but I'm still just trying to have as much fun as possible with it.
Yeah, Ryan, you mentioned the Sapphire Steel and kind of that just falling off. I don't know if it's falling off a cliff, but there's really only one that seems to be still popular amongst, I know there were 3 or 4 different combinations, but why have you jumped? Other than that very first explanation, I know you were very excited about it. Are you just not finding as success with our internal friend group play testing, or what's been the shift? Because that's been pretty recent, right?
Yeah, it's been kind of within the last week. I think what really kind of sent me was there's you're basically playing this like high roll game, right? You're trying to hit both a item and a bell in your opening hand, and that is your and a song, and that is your like I'm hitting the gas and I'm running away with this as fast as I can. And if you don't hit that, then you kind of whiff a little bit, and you have to try to navigate around it. And pre-ban, with the consistency of Hiram, Fortisphere, Popsicle, there was a route or a path to kind of navigating that non-bell play line. And now it seems like it's very that aggro list, at least if you're playing bell and items, it's going to focus heavily on whether or not you hit bell hit and a song and an item on turn one, and you're able to run away with it that way. And even then you still kind of run out of steam a little bit towards the end of that process. And so it's like I didn't really love that play line. And personally, it didn't really feel great for me to be like, all right, I'm out of gas, I don't have an option. I tried teching in a couple of docks. And I still don't love Dock as a card, honestly. It just feels bad to be like, all right, I'm playing as much as I can as fast as possible and hoping I hit Dock at the right time. It just, again, it's that like gambling aspect. It feels like you're just really trying to high roll. And if you're able to high roll game after game after game, then great, you win a set championships. If you're not able to high roll game after game after game, then it's just like, oh, that felt bad and I lose. So I jumped ship a little bit because of that like high roll option and that high roll dependent gameplay. And if I'm going to play the Bell sweepstakes, as I call it, of am I going to hit Bell on an item on turn one, I'd rather play it in Amethyst Sapphire, where you don't necessarily have to hit it. And the only items you're playing are going to replenish themselves with the popsicles, and then the popsicles are also very helpful in providing positive trades or multiple like 2-for-1, 3-for-1 opportunities with the Amethyst board control, board based like gameplay and the interactiveness with the opponent's board. So popsicle kind of feeds into that, and then kind of adding some things alongside that to take advantage of that too. So if I'm going to play the Bell sweepstakes, I'd rather play it in Amethyst Sapphire, where there's definitely a path to success outside of hitting Bell on an item. And the Sapphire Steel, it still feels good when you hit, it feels great when you hit Bell item song and you're just running away with it on your curve. But if you miss that, and in the play testing that we did with each of you online with our Discord group, it just felt like, man, it's a slog, and I don't really feel like I have much hope if I don't hit that perfect line. So that just feels like there's not enough consistency for me to want to bring it or prep it and prepare it as my like primary number one deck list going into a limited set champs experience for me, being in the newborn phase and navigating that as well. So I think that's why I jump ship too.
Yeah, Ryan, you called out 3 cards in particular that I'd love to color in a little more. So in our experience playtesting pre-ban, I think the 2 cards that really swung our matches a bunch in your favor, obviously you were playing the deck very well, but the ability to hit the Bell turn 1 play was extremely consistent. I think you almost hit it pretty much every game. And the mid to later game, Hiram replenish, and then because he's so hard to remove, gonna get probably another draw based on the color that I like to play. You're gonna get 4 cards out of Hiram basically. And because you were running 8 1-drop replace themselves items, I felt like you were able to just keep that gas, flowing consistently, where just wasn't a lot I could do to like play around that. I felt like when we were doing those playtesting matches. And of course, I was running Purple Steel, and I think that kind of leads me into my next point of the question around Dock as a steel sort of draw replacement. I think Dock is one of the most interesting cards in terms of like how it gets played and whether or not it does in certain decks. I know in an Amethyst Steel world, Dock can be kind of nice because you have so many other draw options that you can really save it until you're like really trying to slam down a bunch of characters and then do that and then go into closer to like top deck mode later in the game versus doing a dock on like turn 4 or 5 even, like doesn't feel amazing. So when I had played Amethyst Steel last set, I think when I did well, I hardly used dock. I was on the draw a lot. I hardly, like dock was not a big part of why I was successful. So I think it's an interesting card because it can be a very great card in the right situation. If it's like your key draw engine or one of your major ones, it feel like it sort of is a tough card. I definitely see what you mean around that card being not the best feeling. I do think the fact that it was Hiram and Fortisphere, like 2 very clear cards against Sapphire Steel. So that was always going to probably be a really big uphill battle in terms of what that needed to look like coming out of the ban. I know there are still some people having like the Sapphire Steel since, the early days, people, right, are still finding ways to play it. But I think that goes back to what Mack said of like, or sorry, you said this, Ryan. If you have a deck that you really like playing, right now with where the meta is at, it feels like if you're comfortable, what your deck needs to do, you can use that and you can do really well. I think where it's so funny because legitimately just a few weeks ago, I was saying like, I got to switch to, Ruby Sapphire. And now it feels like you can play what you're comfortable with and you can have a chance at having success. And I think that probably gets us into our next conversation point here of like how we've been playtesting. So I, of course, am back on Amethyst Steel, and I'm loving it. The major difference between this set and last set is basically just been Giant Cobras.
Mm-hmm.
Playtesting over like web games, but also I've been jumping onto Inktable, which we've mentioned a couple times in prior pods about as an AI based practice tool that you can really take with a grain of salt, right? You get punished in certain situations that then kind of teach you how to respond in the future, but it makes pretty poor decisions every once in a while that a real person would not make. For example, questing with an Ursula when your opponent has a Calhoun on the field. I feel like most experienced players probably aren't going to do that in the early game.
Or not playing Be Prepared at the turn 7 when you're behind on board. It just
Yeah.
baffles me when you beat a Ruby deck and they have like 3 Be Prepares in their hand, and I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, like
why didn't we play any of these?
Why didn't we play those? Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things that has been fun is because we keep seeing this variety of deck lists. I've been feeling more like I want to practice against all of those. So I'm trying to practice against discard, which is making a return. I'm trying to practice against more aggro lists. And I think that kind of leads me into the point about why I feel a certain way about Amethyst Steel right now, because I do feel like it has a path to victory in most matchups. Ryan, I think you described Amethyst, maybe this was privately, but you had said like it's the most fair, that like for better or for worse, it maybe doesn't like run away with anything in particular, but it kind of can compete in most situations. And I think for me, I like that aspect of it, that it feels like if I make some of the right decisions along the way and I limit miscues, I have a chance. Now, of course, that being said, you just mentioned you thinking about Blurple, and I think I'm now like 4-4, 4 wins on the play, 4 losses on the draw between playtesting you and Connor with that particular color combination. So still trying to figure out how to do that better on the draw against a bigger control deck that I think you would aptly put it. It does what you want to do in a way better in that like mid to late game. So Ryan, I'd love to hear a little bit more perspective on like how you're sort of pivoting to Blurple, or if that is indeed what you're doing. And then Mack, some of what you've been noticing with the DKP Ruby Sapphire list, as well as some of the other lists that you've been testing, and the difference between not having a bazillion ink and cards and removal and huge characters.
Right. Yeah, I'll go first with that one. I'll start with the DKP list. The DKP list, I think the biggest difference that I've seen compared to what I'm used to is pre-ban, right? It was you were still inking as much as possible. Like, I know I've told you guys privately, my own personal goal with any sort of match was to get to 15 ink. When I get to 15, if I get to 15 ink, if I haven't won the game or controlled enough and then taken over the game by that point, then my opponent has no chance. So that's kind of what I've been. Even if I play a couple sales throughout the duration of the game, I always try and sing how far I'll go when I have it, right? With DKP, it's really you try and get to the 10 ink is great, but really 8 or 9 is really where you need to be to feel like you've reached that taking over the game point. Reason being is obviously Maui Shark costs 6, right? But then if some people still play some Mal Dragons, I'm one of those, so obviously we need to get to 9 ink there. But really it's the combination of if you're playing a Sisu and then next turn you sing a Be Prepared with your Sisu and then you drop 2 manners, that's 8 ink, so and then maybe play another small cost thing, right? So
Gosh, that's crippling.
It's quite crazy, and something still that I've been able to getting used to and understanding that yes, I can sacrifice a Sisu, be prepared to then play two locations that are really hard for then my opponent to remove, right? So that's the biggest thing, right? Is the difference in inks required to run the DKP list than the previous, Sisu on Ice list that was really popular pre-ban. The other thing too that I've noticed is DKP is running anywhere from 3 to 4 big Sisu empowered sibling, no Maleficent Dragons. He's been testing no brawls. So he said in an interview that he relies on ramping up really quick. So by turn 6, he can play that big Sisu to wipe the board and then take over with his sharks. I still feel the biggest difference I have in my list is I run 3 big Sisus, 3 Mal Dragons, because I still like being able to do something when I'm not peated. Is essentially what I've run into. In my play testing with Nathaniel, it's really hard to remove Amethyst Steel. My hardest match that I've run into besides discard is Amethyst Steel, because you have 3 strength characters, and a lot of them. So Big Sisu really doesn't do much against that when you play Sisu on board. So you're relying on the Be Prepared, and that's only 4 cards. And the other side of that, so I was like, how can I get more removal and take over control when Sisu doesn't work? So I've added 3 Maleficent Dragons on that because of it. So one example that I have is Nathaniel and I were playing, what 1 or 2 nights ago, right? And you thought you had game in hand. You were at 16 ink, and you played a Pete, and I was still at 9 or 10 ink, and you were starting let's just flush the board with as many characters and see what you can do when I am really close to winning. So you played the Pete, and then I played the Mal Dragon to remove one of your characters. You were at 19 lore, and then you couldn't repeat, so to speak. So then I played a Be Prepared, and then that turn I won because I was able to play a Pirate's Life, and then I kept wiping your board. So that one Mal Dragon saved me the game, being able to still control the board without relying on my actions when Big Sisu really doesn't work. So that's my biggest difference with the DKP list. It might be a little bit risky because I'm relying on still getting to that 9 ink total as opposed to an 8 ink total, but I've found more success that way in late game control. You better hope though that you don't run into an aggro list and you don't whiff on your ramp. Otherwise, you're going to lose pretty quickly. That's kind of the biggest thing too.
Sure.
With the current DKP version is there are more outs to if you don't hit your ramp earlier in the game.
Yeah. I think one of the things, while we're talking about that matchup that I've been so interested in, and part of another reason why I like Amethyst Steel is it does feel like it has tools for these matchups. So actions and song decks, Pete is an extremely important card. It is a card that is so important, in fact, that you'll see some of these lists titled as Pete and Repeat because of the bounce aspect of Amethyst. You can have 4 Petes, but because you have bounce characters, you could have anywhere between, unofficially, right, 8 to 10 Petes, because you're bouncing Pete back to your hand with a Madam Mim, and then you're replaying it to block them from doing actions. And so that's one of the reasons why I think I really like where Amethyst Steel is situated right now, because it does have that ability to stall out those types of decks. You think about a deck like Steel Song in particular, preventing them from singing for consecutive turns or a few turns in a row can be absolutely crippling when you have bigger characters and they don't get to do the thing that they like to do, which is sing. So
not only do you prevent them from singing songs, you also prevent other players from playing the Steel Song deck because you playtest repeat against them, and they hate it.
Yeah. So it's a little bit tongue in cheek there, but I play tested and repeated 4 or 5 turns in a row to the point where our friend Connor dropped Steel Song ahead of a set championships, legitimately within a week before set champs. He pivoted to Blurple, and then he got top 8. So I like to think that I did him a favor in a way.
Yes,
but
you're right. You did. Congratulations.
But
you can take all credit for that.
No, he played beautifully. It was really fun to actually watch and cheer him on and see the success he was having at the local kind of competitive level. But in playtesting that actually prepared me in some ways, pun definitely intended, prepared me for playing against Mack, where just like how we talked about in our Emerald episode about knowing when to discard with things like Sudden Chill, the same thing goes when you're running a Pete deck and you're playing against something that is relying on actions. So if you are playing against somebody who is running Ruby Amethyst, you are looking at their ink when they are at 6. You probably want to play a Pete, because when they hit 7, if your board is really wide and theirs isn't, guess what's coming down? Oh yeah, be prepared. If you're playing the Shark list, Pete is probably the most important card you could possibly have in your deck, because how do they farm a lot of lore? The Shark, which requires actions. There's like essentially 3 other cards that are, in my opinion, like the big swing cards in that particular deck. And so it's obviously the Half Shark, Maui Hero to all for earlier board presence for that deck. Be prepared for the board wipe before you start taking over. And then actually a card that deck revived, which is a Pirate's Life. So Mack had just touched on it when we were playtesting. When I was not able to Pete again later in the game, the power of a Pirate's Life to just claw back the opponent over and over again, and if you can recycle it by Maui challenging and then reviving an action, it really makes it so that the finish line just feels further and further and further away. It's kind of like an action-based version of the Amethyst Donald Duck, which like changes the winning lore number to 25. But Pirate's Life, if you are able to recur it, or you're able to play a few of those, it feels really bad when you're playing against that. So again, Pete really important, because then you're blocking them from doing that, and you can help try to get to that race to 21st, knowing that it is more of a control deck. And so if you are not also running a control deck, you probably have to go, as I like to say, on the gas pedal if you want to win.
Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the
Bad
truth? I think that's
jokes
kind
are
of
coming
the fun
out
thing.
in this.
I mean, you wouldn't expect anything less from a podcast titled DuckTale Dads.
No, I
It's
love
very
it.
on the nose.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you kind of touched on one of the things that, briefly, that I like about the Amethyst Sapphire, kind of shifting the conversation a little bit to there now, is the ability to kind of go both, be that mid-range deck, that semi-mid-range deck. Amethyst Sapphire is a little more of a control deck than Amethyst Steel, especially your list, but being able to either go under either a really big control list, or being able to like stall out and control out a smaller aggro list, and kind of being able to play that middle ground, and feels good. Never feeling like you're running out of, and never completely out of the game. There's always going to be one answer that you could pull off the top that might do it for you. I think, in order to like play test it, I just like looked at a bunch of lists online, kind of net decked a little bit, just trying to compare and contrast what new cards are being included. So how I kind of updated my set 6 list to set 7 now. And then also just like reading some of the set 7 cards and seeing like, oh, that seems like a cool, interesting effect that could fit in. How could I fit it in? What can I do to make this work? And then just keeping an eye on it and ear to the ground, and just seeing when that card that I was interested in might pop up in someone else's list, and how they're using it, and what they're kind of replacing with it, basically, and kind of eventually landing on the final list that I'm sort of just kind of ratioing out now, and figuring out what wants to come in, what wants to go out. Is it really the set 7 card, or the new card that I put in something that I really want to do? The cards that I took out, am I missing them a lot? Am I thinking like, oh man, I really wish I had this one card right now? Like, am I losing games because of it? Am I winning games because of the card they put in? Like, just kind of keeping an eye on those things as we're kind of playtesting things. And then being busy dads, we're always just trying to figure out, where is this going to fit in during my week? How am I going to test this out? So my go-to has been kind of late night after bedtime, an hour and a half, 2 hours, just getting online, seeing if anybody's around and wants to play games over Discord, using, the cameras on our computers, or if you have fancy cameras, and a fancier camera than I have. But then just playing with our playmats in front of us at our own homes across the internet has been huge in terms of just getting extra reps and getting extra games in that aren't ink table reps. Ink table, I think in our preamble to recording this episode, Nathaniel described it as lulling you into a false sense of security. And it certainly does that. When you're testing out a new deck and you're like, man, this is working great. I'm going to smash every deck I face with this particular spice that I cooked up. And then you get online with an actual human across the board from you, and they're not turning things sideways. And you're like, wait, but I'm supposed to win here. Like, why are you not turning sideways? I kind of ran into a huge roadblock with that when I got really excited about Ruby Steel at the very start of set 7, even like the set 7 range. And I was like, oh, Ruby Steel is going to be great. It challenges everything. You drop a Mushu and you instantly win. And then I, just like tested it once, I think, in like a semi-testing setting. And I'm like, yeah, this is awful. This feels so bad. I can't touch anything. I'm playing Ruby Steel. They know I just want to challenge them. So just standing up vertical until they're ready to go to 20, and then they're turning all sideways. And I'm like, that feels bad. But nonetheless, back on the Blurple, just kind of testing things out and playing online is kind of how I'm figuring things out. And more or less right now at this point, I'm not trying to win a DLC. I'm not trying to place in a DLC at this point. especially in a newborn phase with a newborn in the household. I'm just trying to stay competitive and hopefully get a top 8 somewhere if I'm able to get to any set champs this go round. So I'm more or less just trying to get comfortable on my list and find my play lines and figure out, like, is this maybe going to work, and can I find the right places to play these threats, rather than how do I optimize this list to be number one most competitive list in the world. And I just rely on other people to do that type of optimization, and I just follow along.
Yeah, I like what you said, Ryan, about the difference with playing a real person and then also a more experienced player, about this knowing when to quest. I think on our Emerald pod, I talked about how Prince John essentially never quests until the game is like within distance where the turn he quests is the turn you win the game. But that is one of the biggest things I've noticed when I've watched more experienced players is they are very comfortable leaving a character upright for several turns in a row. And one of the players who has done that I've seen, that I've been trying to replicate some of what I've been doing in my Amethyst deck, has been the Ed Chu thing, I call it, where you are using your 1-drops and having them be banished while they're at the library. So as they're studying up the library, when they get banished there, you get to draw a card, and their effect that is printed on the card is when they're banished, they get to draw a card. So you get this like 2-for-1 special. That's been fun to test that out and kind of see how that works. And one of my favorite experiences playtesting against Mack was when I did do the Ed Chu thing, and he was just like, yeah, that was a really good turn. I was very proud of myself because Mack said that.
Yeah, I think I had board control and card advantage, and then he swung for, because I think you sung Friends, and then as soon as that happened too, you did the Ed Chu, I think is what I said, where you were able to banish a broom the turn you played it at the library and got 2 more cards. So you had like a +4 card swing in one turn. And it was impressive to watch. I'll give you that one.
Yeah, and I'm not even just like sitting here trying to talk myself up, but more so just, figuring out these different ways of, and we talked about this at the, just earlier on the pod, right? Like the importance of card draw, card advantage, going even back all the way to our conversation with Christian, right? Like it's one of these resources that if you have card advantage, you are probably feeling fairly okay. Depending on the game state, it is always nice to have a card advantage, and finding ways to get that efficiently, I think, is a fun exercise, particularly when you're playtesting and when you do pull off these certain things. You kind of put that in the back of your mind for like, hey, the next time I'm in this situation, right, here's how I can replenish a lot of cards so I can find a lot more answers.
Yeah, and I want to echo the usage of Inktable, the AI program that we've been using online versus, a live person. Inktable, the way I would summarize it, it does really well when you're learning a new deck, especially the curves of that new deck. So the biggest thing that I've been getting used to, right, is the abundance, or I said lack thereof, of ink available for me to play characters, being off Sapphire decks. Specifically when I've been getting used to Ruby Amethyst. So understanding a new curve of a new deck's playstyle. Inktable is really nice in understanding that curve. Okay, what's my 1-drop I'm looking for versus what am I doing on basically turns 1 through 4, maybe 5. Is what I'm looking at for Inktable. And then as well as counting my opponent's ink. And they're, like you mentioned, Ryan, or maybe it was Nathaniel, about setting up for Be Prepared. When your opponent is at 6 ink and they're running Ruby, you better, in a way, no pun intended, be prepared for the Be Prepared. Because the next turn, that I would say 80%, there's a high likelihood that they're going to be playing that card. And that's just one example. But getting used to your opponent's curve, I think that's what Inktable has been very helpful for me. Then, as you're getting more comfortable with the deck, playing against a live person, right? Understanding how another person thinks when it comes to them questing or leaving characters up, and understanding what they might be planning for 2 or 3 turns from now as opposed to just the next turn. So I think after you've developed an understanding of how your deck operates, then having the play testing with someone else in person through our live Discord chats and Discord videos, understanding kind of the long-term view of what my opponent's deck wants to do, so then I can counter that by thinking about what I'm going to do 2 to 3 turns from now in order to prepare for what they are planning to do with their ink combination. So I would say that's the biggest thing and biggest shift in the benefits to both Inktable, getting used to that, and then as well as getting used to playing an actual opponent when learning a new deck.
Yeah, Mac, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I have also seen some people will do this, and I think there's a ton of value in this. If there is a deck or two in specific that you expect to see a lot of locally, or you have played it and you got your butt whooped by it and you're trying to figure out like, how do I beat this? One of the best ways to figure that out actually is to play that deck like you're the person using the deck that you want to beat, because then you get to see the cards, you get to do the mulligan thing, you get to like figure out all the ways that that deck works. So then when you play against it, you know even more thoroughly what it's trying to do because you've walked in those shoes. I think that's one thing for me where if discard were to come back, I would be a little bit less scared of it because I've played a set on that deck list, right? So I know what it's trying to do. I know what stuff is really hard for it to deal with. So if that were to become more popular, I'm not going to say I'm going to sit here and beat it left, right, and center, but I would at least like to think that if it doesn't like hit the high roll, everything perfect, I can kind of have a sense of understanding what things can I put on the board that are really hard for it to answer that makes it veer from the things it really wants to be doing. And I think that comes from having experience playing the decks. I think if you've been at locals and you're seeing a few different deck lists that you think are going to make it into your set champs, that is one way to prepare for that, is to actually just spend a couple days playing with that deck, even if it is just on ink table, just so you get a sense of what is the curve, what does this try to do, and what combinations does this do that feel really good, right? So if it's churn of dogs, is it the shifting lady recurring some characters, using the tramp to discard a bunch of characters and then getting churn of bog down for cheap, right? Like, you start to understand this is what's kind of how it's building because you've played it now.
That's an interesting point. I think kind of tying that all together, like when do you quest, when do you not quest, and then different decks that you tried and how to play against them. I put together the Trinodogs list as like a hyper aggro thing that I just have in my back pocket in case I wanted to go that route. And playing through it a few times was challenging actually to figure out, because I kept thinking like, oh, it's hyper aggro. I want to turn everything sideways as soon as possible, as often as possible. I don't care if it gets removed. It's going to be in my discard then, and I'll be fine. And then realizing like one game prior to then my wife picking it up and playing it against me, that the goal is to build a wide board and then play tramp and then start turning things sideways. So that was interesting to have that learning point as well. And then also seeing my wife absolutely destroy me a couple times with it, also realizing that is exactly how you need to play that deck, because you just let things sit there until you have like 8 or 10 on board, play or 3 or 4 cards on board, play the tramp, draw and discard a bunch, fix your hand to like the 2 or 3 cards that you really want to be playing in the next 2 or 3 turns, and then quest away, and you're questing basically in 2 turns, which is really, really hard to deal with, to like battle that wide of a board in that short amount of time. And then I just also want to tie a bow on our previous conversation about Sapphire Steel. I think there was one other point I wanted to bring into it, in that it's very applicable and relevant for kind of where I'm at in my Lorcana journey, if that makes sense. And I'm sure some other people are kind of feeling similarly, in that there's obviously a money aspect to it, right? And I think some of the most successful Sapphire Steel decks right now are going the route of like the Robin Hood shift line, the Beast shift line, those type of options, in order to kind of replace what was lost with Hiram Fortisphere and the consistency that deck had. And so I have 1 copy of Robin Hood, Champion of Sherwood, and I have no copies of Beast. So I don't have the option to shift to follow that meta trend for Sapphire Steel aggro lists. I definitely don't have the cards required to play the big blue steel items list either, since I had been prepared for this aggro list, and then it had to shift. So not wanting to play the Bell Sweepstakes, and also not having the money or the intention of spending that much money. It would be another like $200 for me to find those play sets in order to like get back on track with what the aggro list is doing. And so I decided I'm gonna keep what I have, and if I want to play Bell Sweepstakes with a steel flavor, then that's fine. But I'm gonna play the Bell Sweepstakes with the purple flavor instead, and I feel like there's a lot more consistency there, and I like that too. So being very realistic, and again harkening back to a far previous discussion on this podcast that I'm sure we'll revisit again in the future. Maintaining and staying within a budget for yourself and for your situation is highly important, and able to like making this a long-lasting hobby rather than just kind of burning out and flaming out in just one set.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ryan. And I want to echo to our listeners who might be feeling down for an investment that they made either with the Ruby Sapphire or the Sapphire Steel with regards to the Tamatoa. Maybe they bought high and now you're seeing the price drop and what have you. I would say there's hope. The flip side of that is that early of set 7, we saw Maui Half Shark decrease in value because it was easy to remove Maui Half Shark the turn it was played based on where the meta was going. Very much a steel meta where a lot more Along Came Zeus was prominent, and you could remove the Half Shark, right? And we saw Half Shark hit low fees in value per card. With the shift in the ban, I think Maui Half Shark is the most expensive non-enchanted card in the game now. It's in the mid-60s due to the now prioritization of utilizing, because the reason being is last set 6, when Half Shark also saw a lot of popularity during the Amethyst meta. After post-ban, moving to this Amethyst meta again, we're seeing the rise in the Shark again. So I guess my little sign of hope for all of you listeners that may be feeling down in an initial investment earlier in this set, cards will ebb and flow. You know, with the release of set 8, we might see something go down in price, and then something we're not even thinking of might increase in value again, and you might have a play set of those. So, like, just, you know, chin up if you're thinking about the financial aspect of this. I think there will be highs and lows when it comes to multiple different types of cards and popular cards within this game. So that's kind of just my 2 cents I wanted to throw in there for people feeling a little bit down.
Yeah,
on
I
that.
think one more parting thing, and actually referencing that, you reminded me of it because you talked about the Half Shark list. I think something that's really interesting, we've talked at length about how Amethyst coming back into that meta scene, it draws cards so well. One of the things that Sapphire does, even without Hiram, better than any other deck, is it digs for the right card. So maybe it's not adding a lot of cards the way it used to with Hiram, but you're able to still use a lot of cards in there. You think of Vision, you think of Develop Your Brain. There's just cards to sift through your deck to find the right answers for the right time. Sapphire still does that, especially in that Half Shark deck. So I think you're probably seeing a lot of Ruby Sapphire players shift over to that deck list, Mack included, potentially. Yeah. Well, great discussion, guys. Really excited to get going on set champs here in the next, less than 2 weeks. We'll be looking for plenty more playtesting opportunities. But in the meantime, for all you listeners, please be sure to check us out on our Instagram page as well as our YouTube channel for additional content. I really appreciate all the listeners that we have already and some suggestions we've been getting from some of those listeners. We'll be implementing some of those in future podcasts. And without any further ado, let's get the duck out of here.